Welcome, everybody. We're celebrating the third annual International Mindful Eating Day this year. And our celebration theme is Compassionate Self-Care is Essential. So today we're going to be learning how to take care of ourselves in the realm of relational self-care. Over the course of the day, we're looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and relational. And I'm pleased that we have Kristy here today, Kristy Arbon. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So Kristy and I have done some work together before, and it's really lovely to have her here today. She's the founder and CEO of Heartworks Training and the Center for Somatic Self-Compassion, which supports people in their practice of self-compassion, mindfulness, somatic awareness, shame resilience, and tapping into emergent self-wisdom. In fact, she was just saying that she has a new somatic self-compassion class starting soon, right, Kristy?
I do indeed. Yes. Looking forward to that.
Is that an online class?
It will be online. Yes. So very accessible.
Okay. And you can find Kristy at very easily at KristyArbon.com. And I guess the information about that class will be there.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So Kristy's work has deep roots in mindful self-compassion. She's done a lot of training with, like, I guess, Kristen Neff and Kristen Bergermer, and been teaching it for a long time. Internal family systems is part of her background. Sensory modulation, Brene Brown's shame resilience model, Buddhist philosophy, and the exploration of archetypes. All sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Kristy was born in Australia, as you can tell from her accent, and has lived in the U.S., though, for the last 13 years with her American husband. She currently lives in St. Louis, which is near me. And she also teaches around the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, South America, Bhutan, and online. So that's wonderful, Kristy. So nice to have you here. I want to just go ahead and get started and talk about how can we use self-compassion in our relationship to ourselves. What would be your take on that?
Yeah, so self-compassion, as the word suggests, has the word self in it. It's all about compassion towards ourselves. And we distinguish that between compassion focused outwards to other people. In fact, it's the same thing. It's like the same superpower, whether we focus it outwards or we focus it inwards, basically. So self-compassion, what it does is it gives us a level of emotional resiliency to allow us to take care of ourselves when we're having difficult emotions, basically. Many of us want to run away from difficult emotions. We weren't taught how to stay with ourselves, how to tend to ourselves when we're feeling anger or shame, or the inner critic is having a go at us, so we're feeling sad. Our culture tends to tell us, take a pill or go and, do something to distract yourself.
Or eat some food.
Or eat some food. Yes. Here, go and eat this. Food is love. So this is what our culture often tells us. But those things are not sustainable. You have to keep eating food to keep loving yourself, because the pain doesn't tend to go away through eating food. In fact, as you know, it can exacerbate the pain.
Well, absolutely. Then you feel bad and you don't love yourself because you ate too much, and then it's just self-perpetuating.
You eat more, yeah. So self-compassion it's about it's about having an internal resource. So we're not relying on something external to us. We're not relying on distraction or food or drink or addiction or whatever else it is that we're using to get away from our pain. We're doing this radical shift and actually turning towards our pain, which, we're not often invited to do. But in fact, if we can take care of ourselves in our pain, we don't need all of these other things. It actually leads to, as I said, emotional resiliency, basically.
Sounds lovely, but how do you put that into practice?
Oh, well, I wish I could say it's super easy.
I know, right?
But it is not super easy. So, and part of the reason it's not super easy is because our culture generally is not one of self-compassion. Our culture is generally one of self-criticism, shame, isolation, even loathing ourselves, hating our body, hating ourselves for our actions, being a perfectionist. This is sort of what our culture in the West I'm talking about. And I'm not saying everybody's like this, but generally we're pretty mean towards ourselves. And it came from a culture, the intention was take care of yourself and look out for all the things about yourself that are bad, so that you can protect yourself from that, so that no one else finds out about those things, so that you're not kicked out of the tribe, basically. Right. So very much a shame. It's a shame culture that we're in.
Yeah.
So training in self-compassion, and we actually need to do training because it's not what our culture's taught us to do.
Right.
And there are a bunch of training programs we can do in self-compassion and compassion cultivation. And they mainly involve mindfulness, very important, mindfulness, developing a sense of kindness towards ourselves, and being in community. Community is so important for learning how to overcome this sort of culturally induced self-loathing that many of us have.
Right. Well, and embedded in the whole practice of mindfulness is kindness and compassion, right? It often isn't brought out as much as I think it should be or could be. So I love that these separate self-compassion practices have been developed so that people can really begin to cultivate that kindness aspect of mindfulness that is already there, but sometimes people don't, it's not talked about. Mindfulness is sometimes talked about as just being present. But it's really being present with these qualities of kindness and compassion that are brought out so nicely in these practices.
I think some people inherently have a sense of kindness and compassion towards themselves. And so for those people, mindfulness naturally includes these things.
Right.
But for many of us, we need to, because as you say, it is inherent in true mindfulness, is being able to take care of ourselves. Many of us need to learn it. So this is, this is what we're doing, is training in self-compassion, partly so that we can support our mindfulness practice.
Yes, absolutely. So how do we use, we're talking about relational self-care, and our most important relationship, of course, is with ourselves. And so starting there is a really important thing, but how can we use it when we're in relationship with others and those others become stressful? I'm sure everybody has some stressful others in their lives.
Not me. No one in my life is stressful.
Right.
So one of the beautiful things about practicing self-compassion is it pretty much automatically affects our relationships, our ability to be compassionate with others. Firstly, self-compassion teaches us that we're all flawed human beings. None of us are perfect human beings. When we can give up on this idea of being perfect, give ourselves a break, accept that we are who we are. Once we embody that, we understand that in our being, naturally we start to accept that in others. We cease expecting perfection in ourselves, and then we also cease expecting perfection in others. So that's a huge piece of it. When I stop projecting onto this other person, especially someone close to me, when I stop expecting them to be a particular way, I leave space for them to be who they are, and for me to be in relationship with that person, which makes the most sense, rather than being in relationship with a person we want them to be.
Right. Yeah.
So what self-compassion does, and research has backed this up, is when we can take care of ourselves emotionally, so we have this sense of emotional resiliency, we can cease to look to people outside of us to take care of us emotionally. And, some of this goes back to childhood patterns and having unmet needs and, resolving a lot of that. So there can be a lot of work in the process. Once we can learn to meet our needs directly, we can learn to read the signals in our body, and trusting our body is a big piece. Many of us don't trust our body. And once we have some tools to tend to ourselves, very practical tools, like, just giving ourselves a hug, or noticing when our boundaries are being stepped over. So many of us don't have a clear sense of our boundaries. Boundaries come from a sense of internal understanding and caring enough about ourselves that we can stand up for ourselves. So once we get all of this stuff and we're able to kindly and compassionately communicate it to others, it really contributes to a healthier relationship, especially in an intimate relationship. As I said, research has shown that people who have high levels of self-compassion tend to be considered better intimate partners. Mostly because we cease to project onto others. We cease to expect them to be perfect,
right?
We cease to look to them to meet all of our needs. It just takes a whole lot of pressure off the relationship.
Yeah, it seems that would be a nice person to be in a relationship with.
It would be, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, people prefer to be in relationship with people who have high levels of self-compassion. So it's a great reason. You're actually more attractive when you have high levels of self-compassion, just in case you're in the dating game.
Exactly. Well, and one more question here. We can automatically reach for food when we're feeling the stress of a relationship or the stress of just our lives. What would you recommend for how we can take better care of ourselves from a compassionate standpoint in those times when, how can we remind ourselves to bring self-compassion to ourselves and be with that emotion instead of using food?
Yeah. First thing I would say about that is this can be a very difficult journey for people, as I know you know, and it's great that we can offer tools and tips and advice, but I just want to acknowledge how difficult it is to move from loving ourselves with food to loving ourselves in other ways. Really, it can take many, many years, this journey. And so really the tool to good self-care is self-compassion. I've got to accept myself who I am, accept that I'm not perfect and stop judging myself before I can really start to take care of myself.
That's so important. What you just said there, right? That whole accepting yourself just as you are is the first step.
It's the doorway in.
It's the doorway in. That's so hard for so many people. It is.
It is. And so what self-compassion starts with, it's not about changing yourself. It's actually about being with who you are in the moment. We've got to do that first, really do that, not expect any changes, and then gradually move into things that are healthier for us, eating better food, making choices like maybe, I love to go for a walk, or I love to be on the treadmill, or I love to have coffee with a friend. I'm going to choose to do that rather than eat, because that will tend to my body, that will tend to me relationally, that will make me feel good. The inner critic won't have anything to say about it afterwards. So it's this, we gradually get to this place where we realize we have a choice. I'm not compelled to eat in order to soothe myself. I can broaden it out to some other choices, and we may still eat. I mean, eating is love. Carbohydrates, it gives us dopamine hits. So, there's still that, but to know that we have a choice. I think that's the big piece once we've developed some self-compassion and started to move into that self-care area.
Yeah, I really like the question, which is part of a self-compassion practice, which is, how can I best take care of myself in this moment, when I'm feeling suffering? So I think that's a really good thing to remember, is that, we have choices, and what would be the loving, kind response to myself, even if it's a little thing like, let me just go walk around the block, or, look at the sky and listen to the birds, and something that brings me out of that kind of conditioning that we have and into something different. Yeah.
And I think before we get there, we've got to do a bunch of work around why am I hurting right now, and learning to turn towards that. So learning that emotional resiliency that some self-compassion training can offer us. I think we've got to do that first before we get to that place of knowing that we have a choice. So it's a journey, it's an adventure, it's a journey, but we are all worth it. We're all totally worth getting started on this journey of self-compassion, self-care, mindfulness. It opens the doorways to so many other things, living more creatively, more aligned with our purpose, better relationships, more pleasure and joy. Who doesn't want more pleasure and joy?
I want it. Let's take it. Yeah. Well, so before we run out of time, is there any particular meditation we can practice for this, just to give us a little taste of something that might get us started?
Do we want to do one now, or do you want me to tell you about one?
Why don't we just do one now?
All right, let's do it. How long? Just a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, so making yourself comfortable and just closing your eyes, either fully or partially. Noticing your breathing. And on the in-breath, imagining that you're breathing in a quality of kindness, compassion, love, tenderness, something that you'd like to offer yourself right now, something that you need right now. Breathing that in. And adding in on the out breath, something you'd like to release, something you'd like to let go of, maybe a struggle, a tension, a pain, a distraction. Breathing in something kind for yourself, and releasing out something you'd like to let go of. And just going through one more cycle of breathing in for yourself and releasing out what you'd like to let go of. And releasing your focus on the breath. Gently opening your eyes.
That was lovely. I feel so much better.
It's so short, isn't it? We can do these really short little practices.
Yeah, you just got rid of all of my anxiety about the rest of the week.
Excellent. You're welcome. That's self-compassion.
It is self-compassion. Well, thank you so much, Kristy, for being with us today. It really has been lovely talking to you and seeing you. And I just want to remind people that Kristy's such a wonderful teacher, and I hope you take advantage of her when you can. And you can find her at www.KristyArbon, that's KRISTYARBON.com. Okay. And she's got some great classes coming up. So thank you once again for sharing Mindful Eating Day with us, where it's all about self-compassion.
Lovely. Lovely to talk to you, Lynn. Happy Mindful Eating Day.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.